There is a part of you that you pretend does not exist. Not because it's small, not because it's irrelevant, but because seeing it would shatter the story you tell yourself about who you are. This part contains everything you've disowned, every trait you've judged as unacceptable, every desire you've labeled as shameful, every impulse you've buried because acknowledging it would make you uncomfortable, unlovable, wrong. Carl Jung called this part the shadow, and he believed it is one of the most powerful forces in your psyche.
Not because of what's in it, though what's in it is significant, but because of what happens when you refuse to look at it. The shadow does not disappear when you ignore it. It does not dissolve because you've decided it's not part of you. It grows. It festers. It finds other ways to express itself, through projection, seeing in others what you refuse to see in yourself, through self-sabotage, destroying what you claim you want because some hidden part of you believes you don't deserve it, through sudden eruptions, moments when the repressed part of you breaks through and you act in ways that shock even yourself.
And then you say, "That wasn't me. I don't know what came over me. I'm not like that." But Jung would say, it was you. It has always been you. And until you stop pretending it isn't, you will remain at war with yourself. Split, fragmented, living only half a life because the other half is buried in darkness, demanding to be seen. Before we go further, ask yourself this. What part of yourself do you hate? What quality, when you see it in others, triggers immediate disgust or judgment?
What do you accuse others of being that you would never, ever admit you are? Selfish, weak, arrogant, needy, cruel, petty, jealous, manipulative. Whatever word came to mind, that's your shadow speaking. That's the part of you that you've buried so deeply, you've convinced yourself it doesn't exist. But it does, and it's running your life from beneath the surface, shaping your choices, sabotaging your relationships, keeping you small because you're terrified that if you grow too much, if you become too visible, someone will see what you've been hiding. And Jung believed that the only way out is through. Not by becoming your shadow, not by acting out every repressed impulse, but by seeing it, acknowledging it, integrating it, bringing it into consciousness so it no longer controls you from the darkness. This is the work of individuation, the process of becoming whole, and it is one of the hardest things a human being can do, because it requires looking at the part of yourself you've spent your entire life refusing to see. Carl Jung was born in 1875 in a small Swiss village, the only surviving son of a pastor father and a mother who seemed to live in two worlds, one ordinary, one mysterious and strange. Jung grew up feeling split between the daylight world of reason and the nighttime world of dreams, visions, symbols. And from an early age, he knew there was something inside him that did not fit. Something dark, something that his family, his church, his culture would never accept. He kept it hidden. He learned to perform, to be the good son, the obedient student, the respectable psychiatrist. But inside, the shadow was alive, and it terrified him. As a young man, Jung experienced what he later called a creative illness, a psychological breakdown that lasted years. He withdrew from the world. He stopped seeing patients. He spent his time alone, descending into his own unconscious, confronting images and figures that emerged from the depths of his psyche. Some of them were beautiful. Some were monstrous. And Jung understood that both were him. That he was not just the rational, respectable doctor, he was also the madman, the mystic, the part of himself he had been taught to fear. And instead of running from it, he stayed. He dialogued with these inner figures. He wrote them down. He painted them. He gave them form. And slowly, painfully, he integrated them. He stopped pretending he was only light. He admitted the darkness. And in doing so, he became whole. This experience shaped everything Jung would later teach. That the psyche is not singular, that inside every person are multiple figures, voices, potentials, and that the most dangerous thing you can do is pretend they don't exist, because what you repress does not disappear. It becomes the shadow, and the shadow will find a way to speak. Jung defined the shadow as everything in you that you cannot accept as part of yourself. It is not inherently evil. It is not the bad part of you, though it contains things you judge as bad. It is simply the rejected part, the disowned part, the part you decided at some point in your life was unacceptable. And this rejection usually happens early, in childhood, when you learn what is rewarded and what is punished. When you discover that certain parts of you are loved and certain parts are shamed. And so you split. You keep the acceptable parts visible, the good child, the kind person, the competent adult, and you bury the rest, the anger, the neediness, the selfishness, the desire, the cruelty, the weakness. Whatever your family, your culture, your sense of self could not tolerate, that becomes the shadow. But here's what Jung understood. The shadow is not just negative traits. It also contains positive qualities that you've repressed because they were too much, too powerful, too threatening. If you grew up in a family that valued humility, your confidence became shadow. If you grew up in a culture that punished ambition, your drive became shadow. If you were taught that anger is bad, your righteous rage became shadow. If you were told that wanting attention is selfish, your need to be seen became shadow. And so you live a diminished life, not just hiding your flaws, but hiding your strengths. Because both threaten the carefully constructed persona, the mask you show the world. The persona is who you pretend to be. The shadow is who you actually are, but refuse to admit. And most people live their entire lives in this split, performing the persona, projecting the shadow, never integrating, never becoming whole. Jung saw this everywhere, in his patients and his colleagues, in himself. And he saw the cost: depression, anxiety, addiction, relationship breakdowns, self-sabotage. The shadow does not stay buried quietly. It leaks, it erupts. It destroys what you're trying to build because some part of you, some rejected, disowned, furious part of you, refuses to stay silent. He told a story about a man who came to him for therapy. The man was kind, gentle, soft-spoken, a devoted husband, a loving father, a respected member of his community. And he was miserable. He didn't know why. He had everything he was supposed to want, and yet he felt dead inside, hollow, as if he were watching his own life from a distance. Jung asked him, "What do you hate most in other people?" The man thought for a moment. Then he said, "Aggression, selfishness, men who take what they want without caring about others." And Jung said, "That's your shadow. The part of you that you've buried so deeply you've forgotten it exists. You've spent your entire life being nice, being accommodating, being selfless, and in doing so, you've killed the part of you that wants, that desires, that fights. And now you're not living, you're performing. And the performance is suffocating you." The man was horrified. He refused to believe it. He insisted he was not aggressive. He was not selfish. He had worked his entire life to be the opposite of those things. And Jung said, "I know. That's the problem. You didn't integrate those qualities.
You exiled them, and now they're destroying you from the inside. This is what the shadow does. When you refuse to acknowledge it, it doesn't go away. It turns inward. It becomes depression, self-hatred, paralysis. Or it turns outward. It becomes projection.
Projection is when you see in others what you cannot see in yourself. You hate in them what you've disowned in you. The person who constantly accuses others of being selfish is often terrified of their own selfishness. The person who is disgusted by neediness is usually denying their own desperate need for connection. The person who judges others for being weak is running from their own vulnerability. Jung believed that almost all intense emotional reactions to others are projections.
If someone triggers you, if their behavior enrages you, disgusts you, obsesses you, it's because they're reflecting your shadow. They're showing you the part of yourself you refuse to see. And this is why shadow work is so difficult, because it requires you to turn your judgments inward, to ask, what am I seeing in them that I cannot admit in myself? What quality am I hating in them because I've buried it in me? And when you do this honestly, when you stop projecting and start seeing, it's devastating. Because you realize that the person you've been judging, the person you've been hating, is just a mirror. And the hatred you feel toward them is the hatred you feel toward the disowned parts of yourself. Jung experienced this in his own life, most painfully in his relationship with Sigmund Freud. And when you do this honestly, when you stop projecting and start seeing, it's devastating. Because you realize that the person you've been judging, the person you've been hating, is just a mirror. And the hatred you feel toward them is the hatred you feel toward the disowned parts of yourself. Jung experienced this in his own life, most painfully in his relationship with Sigmund Freud.
Jung and Freud met in 1907. Freud was already famous, the father of psychoanalysis. Jung was young, ambitious, brilliant, and Freud saw in Jung his successor, his intellectual heir, the one who would carry psychoanalysis forward after he was gone. They became close, father and son, mentor and protege, and for a few years the relationship was intense, generative, transformative for both. But beneath the surface, the shadow was stirring, because Freud demanded loyalty, obedience, agreement. He wanted Jung to stay within the boundaries of his system,
to accept his theories without question. And Jung, who had his own visions, his own ideas, his own need for intellectual independence, began to feel suffocated. And then Jung discovered something Freud refused to see, that the unconscious was not just a repository of repressed sexual desires, as Freud insisted. It was something vaster, deeper, more mysterious, a collective unconscious, a shared psychic inheritance filled with archetypes, universal symbols, patterns, images that appear across cultures, across time. And the shadow was one of these archetypes.
Freud rejected this. He accused Jung of mysticism, of abandoning science, of betraying psychoanalysis. And Jung, who had once idealized Freud, who had seen him as a father figure, began to see him differently, as controlling, as dogmatic, as unable to question his own theories. And the relationship shattered in letters that were bitter, accusatory, filled with projection, each man seeing in the other what he could not see in himself. Freud accusing Jung of arrogance and rebellion, qualities Freud himself possessed but could not admit. Jung accusing Freud of rigidity and authoritarianism, qualities Jung feared in himself.
The break devastated both men. Freud never fully recovered from the sense of betrayal. Jung entered a period of profound psychological crisis, descending into his own unconscious, confronting the shadow figures that emerged. And both men, despite their brilliance, despite their insights, could not fully integrate what they saw in each other. This is the tragedy of projection, that the people who trigger you most intensely are often the ones reflecting your own shadow.
And if you cannot see that, if you keep projecting instead of integrating, you will lose them. You will destroy the relationship. You will remain at war with the very part of yourself they were trying to show you. Jung eventually understood this. He saw that his rage at Freud was also rage at himself, at the part of him that wanted to be obedient, that wanted to be the good son, that feared his own independence. And he saw that Freud's rage at him was Freud's rage at his own rigidity, his own fear of being questioned, his own need to be right.
But by the time Jung understood this, the relationship was over, and both men carried the wound for the rest of their lives. This is what the shadow costs, not just internal suffering, but the destruction of relationships. Because when you project your shadow onto others, you cannot see them clearly. You see only your own rejected parts, and you either idealize them, making them carry your disowned positive qualities, or you demonize them, making them carry your disowned negative qualities. Either way, you're not relating to a real person. You're relating to your own unconscious. And when the projection inevitably collapses, when the person reveals themselves to be human, flawed, separate from your fantasy, you feel betrayed. But the betrayal is not theirs. It's yours. You betrayed yourself by refusing to see your shadow, and you betrayed them by making them carry it. Jung believed that integrating the shadow is the first and most essential step in individuation, that you cannot become whole if you remain split, that you cannot know yourself if half of yourself is hidden in darkness,
And that the work of seeing the shadow is not optional. It will happen one way or another, either consciously, through deliberate inner work, or unconsciously through projection, self-sabotage, and the slow erosion of your life. But how do you see the shadow? How do you bring into consciousness something that has been, by definition, unconscious? Jung offered a method. Simple, brutal, effective. Pay attention to your projections. Notice who triggers you, who you judge, who you hate, who you idealize, and ask, what quality in them am I refusing to see in myself?
Pay attention to your slips, the moments when you act in ways that contradict your self-image, the times you say something cruel and immediately regret it, the times you sabotage yourself and don't know why. These are not accidents. These are the shadow speaking. Pay attention to your dreams. Jung believed that the shadow often appears in dreams as a figure of the same gender as you, someone dark, threatening, or rejected. This figure is not your enemy. It is the part of you trying to be seen.
And most importantly, stop defending, stop justifying, stop insisting that you are only the persona. Admit the darkness, admit the selfishness, admit the cruelty, admit the weakness, admit the parts of you that you've spent your life denying. Not to indulge them, not to act them out, but to see them, to acknowledge them, to bring them into consciousness so they no longer control you from the darkness. This is not easy. This is not comfortable. This will not make you feel good about yourself. Shadow work is confrontation.
It is seeing the parts of yourself you've convinced yourself don't exist. And it is accepting that you were not who you thought you were, that you are more complex, more contradictory, more human than the persona you've been performing.
But Jung believed this is the only path to wholeness, that you cannot be free if you are split, that you cannot love others if you're projecting your shadow onto them, that you cannot live fully if half of yourself is buried in darkness.
And he knew this from experience, because he had done the work. He had descended into his own shadow. He had faced the figures that emerged, and he had integrated them. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to become more whole, more honest, more himself. Jung died in 1961 at the age of 85. He had spent his life exploring the depths of the human psyche, mapping the unconscious, articulating the archetypes, teaching others how to see what they had been trained to ignore. And his final years were spent in solitude in a tower he built by a lake where he could be alone with himself.
With all of himself, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, integrated. And what he left behind is a map, not a solution, not a method that guarantees wholeness, but a map of the territory, a way of understanding why you do the things you do, why you sabotage yourself, why you project, why you feel split, and what it would take to become whole. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the rejected part of yourself that wants to come home. And as long as you keep it in exile, you will remain at war with yourself. You will project it onto others. You will sabotage what you build. You will live only half a life.
But if you can see it, if you can turn toward the darkness instead of away from it, you can integrate it. You can reclaim the parts of yourself you've disowned. You can stop projecting. You can stop performing. You can become, slowing and painfully, the person you actually are instead of the person you've been pretending to be. So ask yourself, what am I refusing to see? What part of me have I buried in the shadow? What do I hate in others that I cannot admit in myself?
And what would it cost me to stop pretending, to stop projecting, to turn toward the darkness and finally see what's there? Jung cannot do this work for you. No one can. The shadow is yours, and only you can bring it into the light. But he can tell you this, that the work is worth it, that wholeness is worth it, that living as your full self, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, integrated, is the only way to stop living at war with yourself. The shadow is waiting. It has always been waiting, and it will keep speaking until you finally listen.